Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today we have Sam Horn in the house. Sam is the CEO of the Intrigue Agency, a positioning and messaging consultancy, which helps people design and deliver TEDx talks, keynotes, funding pitches, and one-of-a-kind brands. Sounds like something we all need. Sam is also the CEO of the Tongue Fu Training Institute, a trademarked communications skill approach that teaches how to give and get respect at work, at home, online, and in public. Sam is the author of 10 books from major publishers, including Tongue Fu, Pop, Take the Belly by the Horns, Someday is Not a Day in the Week, and Washington Post bestseller, Got Your Attention. Sam's work has been featured in dozens of publications, including New York Times, Forbes, Reader's Digest, Fast Company, Harvard Business Review, and she has been interviewed on almost every major news network, including NBC, CBS, NPR, MSNBC, and beyond. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris and Dustin. I've been looking forward to this.
Likewise. We're happy to have you here, Sam. Before we jump into all the questions, I love to hear about the journey. So take a moment to tell us and the listeners a little bit about where you are now, but more importantly, how you got here.
You know, I'll always be grateful to my parents because I grew up in a very small town in Southern California. I kind of grew up on a horse. And even when I was 7 years old and my sister was 8 years old, we'd be gone all day on our horses. And our parents would not caution us. They would not worry. They would not say, oh, what if they get bucked off? What if their bridle breaks or their horse runs away with them? They thought, get bucked off, figure it out. Horse runs away with you, figure it out. So my sister and I grew up seeing the world as an adventurous place, not a dangerous place. And we grew up understanding the importance of being resourceful. Instead of worrying that something might go wrong, we kind of expect that things will go wrong and we can figure it out.
I love that.
So one of the things, Sam, we've talked about a lot of times is this idea of taking chances, right? So when you talk about kind of letting it out into the world, in today's world, I think a lot of times people are afraid of failure. They're afraid of getting outside their comfort zone. And I think that's probably not even new today. I think that's probably always been the case. But what have you seen as you interact with lots of different people about how to break through that, or even get them to recognize that they are in their comfort zone, that they really need to break out of?
Jeff Bezos said the only danger is not to evolve. And I know that your audience of smart, talented executives and entrepreneurs, they embrace that. And they understand that mistakes are doorways to discovery, right? And when we do something wrong, instead of, oh, I blew it, I can't believe that was such a stupid mistake, it's immediately, what did I learn from that? How could I do that better? How could I prevent that from happening again? And then everything that happens to us is grist for the mill of success, right?
Absolutely. So in your career, as you've written lots of books, and even just from the titles of the books, you can see that you've tackled a lot of kind of big, meaty topics. As you've kind of gone through your career, how has your focus evolved from maybe when you really kind of started, what you thought was kind of your unique offering to people, to today?
I love that you use that word focus, because I know you're both involved in sports. And I had the privilege right out of college to go to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, and work with two-time Grand Slam champion Rod Laver. And so Rocket taught me a lot that I continue to use this day. And I will always remember, we used to put on national tennis camps. And this was very, the world's top, model would be there. Executives, entrepreneurs would be there. And so since I was running that program for Rocket, it was pretty intense. And one time afterwards, words, he asked if I wanted to hit, kind of as a reward for working so hard for a couple weeks. And of course, that's a rhetorical question. Do I want to hit with Rod Laver? I think the answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
So he's making me work for it, right? He's running me right. He's running me left. He's running me back, bringing me up short. And finally, he throws up a pretty weak lob. If I put away this overhead, I am going to take a point off Rocket. Well, in my eagerness, I commit the cardinal sin of overheads. Now, you probably play tennis. What is the cardinal sin of overheads?
I don't know.
terrible
I'm a golfer.
Well, almost any athlete will tell you almost every mistake is I took my eyes off the ball, right? I didn't keep my head up on the ball. I put my eyes where I was going to put the ball. Well, I didn't hit the ball. I missed the ball entirely. And I let loose. That was a stupid mistake. I can't believe it. How could I have done that? Now, Rocket is known for his sportsmanship. And so he beckoned me over to the net and he said, Sam, champions never use the word should. Think about it, right? The second they make a mistake, they're already thinking how they can get the next point back, how they're going to keep that from happening again, right? So that day, I banned the word should from my vocabulary with myself and with others, in the workplace. Well, you should have called if you were going to be late. Well, you should have told us you didn't know how to use that system. Well, you should have asked Larry. He's the one who knows, that word should comes across as criticism. People lose faith over what happened and they resent us, even if what we're saying is right. And if instead we shape people's behavior instead of shame it with the word next time from now on in the future, now we're a coach instead of a critic, and people learn from their mistakes instead of lose face over their mistakes.
That's a great point. So often I have twin daughters that are 8, and a lot of how we position things is with certain words and certain language. So my daughters currently, they love to play soccer. They don't love to go to practice, but they love to go to the games. So oftentimes I will say like, hey, you guys get to go to soccer practice tonight, instead of saying you have to go to soccer practice. So I think this is a great segue to Tung Fu. So I don't know about this yet, but as I view your website, I saw Tung Fu, how to coach versus criticize. I'd love to learn a little bit more about this, because I think so many of our leaders who listen could really benefit from a lot of what you're talking about.
I'm so glad you brought this up. And I bet we all believe in stories. I believe that a real life story shows how this unfolds in the real world. Then we unpack it, right? And we get to figure out what we can do that will help instead of hurt. So here's one of my favorite stories about that word should. And if we've got kids, and what we can say that will actually end up making them feel better instead of making them feel bad. And I was visiting my son, Andrew, in New York, and his 1-year-old son, Hero, was crawling across the floor. He pulled himself up on a guitar on a stand in a corner, and he started banging on the strings. Now, Andrew could have said, stop banging on the strings. He could have said, don't bang on the guitar. He could have yanked it away. He did none of that. Do you know what he did instead? He said one word: gentle. And, I saw Hero's face transform in front of me. And he reached back to the guitar and went strum, strum, strum. And Hero made music in that moment. And it was because Andrew used words that shaped his behavior instead of shamed it. And he told him what to do instead of what not to do. And my dad used to say we can't motivate people to do better by making them feel bad. And yelling at people and telling them what to stop doing or what to not doing makes them feel bad, and it doesn't show them how to do better, right? So good for you with your daughters to change the words you have to, which is an order, right? Who likes to be ordered around, to what they get to do, what they're fortunate to do, grateful to do, privileged to do. It changes the whole mindset, doesn't it?
It really does. And I can't take credit. That's actually my wife. And the same was true. They went to their first overnight camp for 5 days, 5 nights. First time that they had left us for that period of time. And normally these two would have said all kinds of things about not going, not wanting. And of course, the immediate thing would be like, no, that sounds terrible. But we positioned it because of my wife thinking in this way. She's like, we just have to talk about the opportunity and how you get to do this. And you'll get to sing songs at campfires and you'll get to go kayaking and boating and all these wonderful things. And she was exactly right. The switch that we flipped, I thought was going to be, heck no, we're not going, Mom. It's going to be full of mud and spiders and this and that. And sure enough, when we told them that was going to happen, they were pure joy and excitement. And so you're right. The usage of language and how you position things can really transform how someone reacts. And so using that in leadership is so key.
Chris, it's so what you're talking about is the river that runs through my books. In fact, Steve Persante, who's the publisher of Barrett Kohler, who was Publisher of the Year a few years ago, I asked him his criteria for publishing a book. He said 3 words: show the shift, right? So if unless people are driving, I hope they get a fresh piece of paper and put a vertical line down the center, because I think the key to making complex ideas crystal clear is to juxtapose them. Put a vertical line down the center right now. In the left-hand column, put words to lose. In the right-hand column, put words to use. In the left-hand column, put reactions. And in the right-hand column, put responses. Now reflect on what we've already said and start feeling that in. Over on the left, put the word should. Over on the right, put the words next time, from now on, in the future. On the left, put critic. Over on the right, put coach. Over on the left, put lose face. Over on the right, put learn. Over on the left, put don't, right? Over on the right, put do. Over on the left, put stop. Over on the right, put start. And with your audience, which are executives and entrepreneurs and leaders, this is transformational. If we will choose words and responses from the right, people are more likely to respond in kind because they're being treated with respect. Is that what you found?
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting to your point of making the complex simple. And every business leader knows it, right? I mean, if it's always people, right? It's always people. It's always communication. It's always those things tying together, and it is amazing on how just words, right? Words can make a significant difference in how things are approached. And I think it's not even for the listener. I think a lot of times it's actually for the sender, right? So if to your point, just thinking through what those words are, right? It changes your own mindset.
Yeah.
If you have to think through that same lens, right? So it's not, I think about it like as a parent, as a leader, whatever, right? If I have to think through and say, well, am I telling them to not do something, or am I telling them what they should do? My entire perspective of that communication or that message, or even what did or didn't happen prior, changes instantly, which I think is really critical.
What you're talking about, you are capturing the essence of tongue fu and talking on eggshells. So let's use another scenario that many leaders constantly face. Let's talk about what to do when people complain, right? So over on the left, put complain, and here's what not to do. Explain. Because if people complain and we explain, explanations come across as excuses. We think people will understand why this went wrong and they'll forgive us. They often get angrier because they feel we're not being accountable. So over on the left, put explain, which comes across as an excuse. Over on the right, when people complain, don't explain, take the A train. A for agree, A for apologize, A for act. If someone says, you were supposed to be here an hour ago. Oh, I know, I was stuck in traffic. There was no. We say A for agree. You're right. I was supposed to be here an hour ago. A for apologize. And I'm sorry you ended up waiting so long. A for act. And I've got that information you requested. Let's dive into it so we can make the most of our time together. The A train expedites complaints. Explanations aggravate them.
I love that.
Excellent.
So, Sam, let's switch from one book to another.
Mhm.
I see you have a new book, which is Talking on Eggshells. So, soft skills for hard conversations. I think so much, as I said before, so many of our audience, so much of them are leaders. And
Mhm.
so much of what we are faced with every day is hard conversations, some harder than others. But I want to know more about this and how this came about.
So here, John Mackey, who's the founder of Whole Foods, gave the cover endorsement for Talking on Eggshells. He said it's the course correct for today's cancel culture. So let me give another scenario that is the whole premise and the purpose of this book, Talking on Eggshells. So over on the left, let's talk about what to do if someone takes their anger or frustration out on us, because every leader deals with that, right? On a daily basis, someone doesn't like what's happening and they're telling us about it. So here's the story, and then we'll unpack what to say and not say in that situation. It's my Aunt Kay is 84 years old, and she volunteers at a hospital 5 days a week. She even did this during COVID, and I asked what it was like, and she said one word: stressful. And I said, well, what was an example when someone took their anger out on you? And she didn't even have to think about it. She held her phone up and she said, a woman came running into the ER, holding up her phone, saying, I just got a text from my daughter. She's in the ER. She was in a car accident. I need to get in and see her. Well, Kate called the ER. Someone was already with the daughter. Now, you may remember the rules in COVID is only one visitor per patient per day, right? She had to give the bad news to the mom that she could not get in to see the daughter. And the woman lost it. She's screaming, she's sobbing, and she is taking it all out on Kay. Now, over on the left, put the words, how rude. How rude. Why are you blaming me? It's not my fault. I didn't make the rules. There's nothing I can do. And you see how it takes you down the rabbit hole of impatience and contempt? We get more frustrated. We're more likely to lash back. Over on the right, instead, Aunt Kay asked herself 4 words. You know what they were? How would I feel? How would I feel if my daughter was in the ER and I couldn't get in to see her? And you know what? It moved her from impatience to empathy, from contempt to compassion, and it gave her the incentive to say, instead of there's nothing I can do, let me see if there's something I can do. She called the ER back. She said, who is with the daughter? It was the Uber driver who had brought the young woman in. Kay was able to explain the situation to him, thank him, he left, and the mother was able to get in with the daughter. Now, as a leader, the next time someone is taking out their anger on us, once again on the left, it's so tempting to react. This wasn't my fault. Why are you blaming me? Is it so undeserved? How would I feel? And we may not like or agree with what they're saying. We may understand where we're coming from, and it gives us the incentive to respond with compassion instead of contempt.
That's a fantastic story. One of the things you brought up is perspective. A lot of times when people are in these intense situations, you mentioned it before, right? React versus response, right? There's a difference there. But I think what's interesting about that story is by changing your mindset and of how you want to react and really how you want to respond to these things.
Mm-hmm.
It gave a completely different perspective. And we see that so often, in today's world where people are just getting shut down for saying things. I think a lot of times it's because of lack of perspective. People can't think for 2 seconds what someone else's perspective might be.
Mm-hmm. You're so right. It's Elvis said, when things go wrong, don't go with them. And over on the left, when things go wrong, so often we are tempted to react, to say what's on the tip of our tongue, and that almost always makes it worse. And you've probably heard the very famous quote from Viktor Frankl is that between an incident and our reaction is a pause, right? And the quality, now I'm paraphrasing what he said. He said the first part, now the second part, the quality of our life is determined by what we decide to do in the pause. And this entire book, Tung Fu, and my other books too, Pop and Got Your Attention and Someday is Not a Day in the Week, is like, how can we show up and behave and act in ways that serve all involved instead of sabotage it?
You mentioned Someday is Not a Day in the Week. That is one of the books, probably one of your first books that I'm going to read. And so often I hear people say, entrepreneurs, and I used to be this long time ago when I started my entrepreneurial journey, is like, oh, someday I want to do this and someday that. Well, someday is just another way of delaying the inevitable, right? And blaming non-action. And so I just think so much when we say that is someday next month, May 5th, right? So if we have a set day, we're not going to say someday because it is a plan, it is a strategy. But so many people don't have a strategy. But I want to know more about this someday. It really intrigues me.
Well, I'm glad you asked about that because I have the privilege of helping a lot of people with their books or TEDx talks or South by Southwest talks or something. And I really believe in origin stories. And we are all familiar with Simon Sinek and Start with Why. Good for Simon. He's made a difference for a lot of people. I believe in starting with where. Because sometimes if we start with why, well, I want to make a difference for people. Well, everybody does. So that's kind of generic. And I think the genius is in starting with where. Is when you share your where of when you begin to care, that's when other people begin to care. So here's my where story about Someday is Not a Day in the Week. I just finished 2 days of very intense consults in Southern California, and my son called and he sensed something in my voice and he said, "What's up, Mom?" And I said, "Andrew, I'm so exhausted. I don't know if I can get on that plane tonight. I've got to turn in my rental car, fly back to DC. 2 days later, I got to fly back to San Francisco to do a keynote. I don't know how I'm going to do it." And he paused for the longest time, and then he jumped in with both feet and he said, "You know, Mom, there's something about you I don't understand. You're an entrepreneur. You run your own business. You can do anything you want, and you're not taking advantage of it." And I thought, out of the mouths of 20-somethings. So I asked myself what I really wanted to do. And what I wanted to do is to take my business on the road. I wanted to have what I called a year by the water. I wanted to sail the Chesapeake Bay. I wanted to go to Giverny, Monet's garden. But, all those excuses, all those rationalizations came up, right? Well, you can't do that. It's like, if you go away, your business will not be waiting for you when you come back, etc. And then I saw a quote from Paulo Coelho. And he said, "Someday you're going to wake up and there won't be any time left to do the things you've always wanted to do." So I put a date on the calendar, October 1st, because if there's anything I've learned, if it's not on the calendar, it's not getting done. It's not on the calendar. It's not getting done. So October 1st, I took off on my year by the water. I interviewed people around the world. Are you happy? If so, why? If not, why not? And I ended up writing a book with those interviews and experiences.
Which book is that?
That's Someday. And here's
Is that
why.
right?
Chris and Dustin, when I interviewed people, I will always remember there was a 30-something guy who was an entrepreneur. You know what it's like to bootstrap a business, to, Michael Gerber, be working on your business instead of in your business, or working in your business instead of on it. And I asked him, "What's your dream?" And I could not believe his answer. He said, "I don't dream anymore. It's too painful." And I'm writing this book. I wrote that book for all the people who think, I'm too busy to dream. I've got to pay the bills. I've got kids to take care of. I've got employees and counting on me, because we've got to have a dream for a dream to come true. That's Oscar Hammerstein. And part of that book is to get crystal clear about what really matters, who really matters, and start making more time for them now, not later, because now is the new later.
Sam, you bring up a really interesting point. A lot of people who are dreamers are entrepreneurs, and a lot of people in the corporate world are not entrepreneurs. And I think it's that group of people who see dreaming as, well, unproductive, unsuccessful, creatives. And I think, like hustle, there's some negative connotations around dreamers, people who want so much and have massive goals. And so I think dreaming is creative. I think it's healthy. I think you should want these amazing things in life, whether it's 10xing your income or traveling around the world or buying a Ferrari, whatever it might be. I think
Yeah.
it's healthy to think that way, at least if your actions map to your ambitions. What do you think about that?
I'm so glad you brought that up. As John Legend said, the future is already here and we are already late. And I have the privilege of doing a lot of speaking for EO Entrepreneurs Organization. And I will remember that one of them had invited an executive who was thinking about leaving the corporate world and becoming an entrepreneur to kind of get a feel for what it was like. And this particular executive, was working long hours, climbing the corporate ladder, etc. And when I asked him what he wanted to do, well, he wanted to become a writer. He always had a book that he wanted to write. But of course, as an executive, he didn't have time to write. And I believe we can have the best of both worlds right here, right now. I do not think they're mutually exclusive. I think when we identify what we want, we can integrate it into our life right now. So, do you know what he did? He started a book club at his corporation. Is there was a boardroom that was not being used during lunch, and so every 2 weeks he started a book club, and now he picked a lot of business books, so it was appropriate for his company, appropriate for the employees, etc. But look, he was steeping himself in the book world. He was thinking about his own book by reading other business books that he liked, he could use as a benchmark, so forth. He wasn't in a position to quit his corporate career at that point. He had 10 years in, he was doing very well. So see, it was not an either or. It was not abandon your career and and to get what you want. And it was not like quit what you're doing to get what you want. You can have what you want right here, right now, if you get creative about it.
So tying these things together a little bit, we talk about dreamers. I think a lot of times where some of the negative connotation is, Chris, you kind of alluded to this, is the massive action that then is required. And so, I'm curious from your perspective, you use you talk a lot about the difference in words, which I think can really kind of change your mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So many people fail in the motion of not acting, right? Call it paralysis by analysis, call it, some days in a day in the week. If somebody is listening today and they have those dreams, they have these goals, but they're just struggling with taking that action. Mm-hmm. What are things they can, whether it be words to themselves, things to themselves that can get them off that line?
I'm so glad you asked that. I guess you can tell I like stories and I like quotes. I think that once again, it's a way to show how other people have been in this same situation. They've been in an impasse or they're in a quandary and how they've worked it out. And often that can be crystallized in this profound and pithy quote. So Rene Ricard said, "Tomorrow is another day, but so was yesterday." So here's what I think that we can do is to get started, is because often if we don't know, we don't go, right? It's like, well, I know I want to do this, but I don't know where to start. And so we don't start. So I believe in figuring out one specific thing that will move it forward and then put it on the calendar and then get some kind of accountability buddy. And I'll use another writing example because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and executives, once again, who want to codify what they've done, their lessons learned, and put it in a book, whether it's to drive their career or just as a legacy project. And I remember one, well, it's Terry Jones, who founded Travelocity and was on the board of Kayak. So Terry, was at a stage in his career where he was ready for his next. And what he wanted his next to be was to codify everything he'd learned and pass it on so that it could add value to others instead of being up in his head, right? But he was always busy. He always didn't have time. And I shared a quote from a good friend of mine, Dan Pointer, who is now passed. But Dan said, "If you wait to write, you're not a writer. You're a waiter." Right? So
That's good.
I'm I'm asking everyone on the call today, what is something you've always wanted to do? Whether you wanted to run a triathlon, whether you want to coach your kids' soccer team, whether you want to write a book, whether you want to run for office, what is something you've always thought someday I'm going to do that? But see, it's overwhelming or it's daunting or you just don't have time or you think that you'll do it when the kids go off to school or you'll do it when you retire. That is a regret waiting to happen. What is one small step you can do right now? Who is someone you could call? And you can go out to lunch with them and you can brainstorm, strategize this. What is a class that you could sign up for? Who is a mentor who's doing exactly what you would like to be doing a year from now? And you can say, I know you're busy. And can I take you out for a half-hour lunch? And do not use the phrase pick your brain. Say, what are your 3 best practices that you would recommend? And I promise to honor your expertise and the fact that you took time with me by acting on it and letting you know the progress I've made as a result of you investing and sharing your knowledge. That makes asking people for their input a win-win instead of just asking them to pick their brain.
Yeah, I
Again,
think that's
going
so
back to
profound.
language and choice of words, it's so important. So if you're a leader and you're listening to this podcast and there's so many great takeaways, where does one start to become a better leader? Because I think so many of the books that you've published, there's so many nuggets in there. And even in the conversation we've had so far, where do you find leaders today are deficient? And using some of the things that you've wrote about today, what are some things, easy things that they can use to improve their leadership?
Hmm. What a great question. Well, people are going to think that I'm paying you to say this, and I'm not. It's like you start listening to podcasts, and here's why. And is because we already talked about Jeff Bezos, and the only danger is not to evolve. And I think our life is our lab. I'm going to say it again. Our life is our lab. And if we are listening to best practicers, if we're listening to people who are really successful, who have figured it out, who have faced challenges and overcome them, every time we listen, we get a little scotch better, especially if we decide how to put it in practice. So I'll share something. I live on a stream trail in Austin. So I'm out there every morning on my walk. And guess what I'm doing? I'm noticing nature and I'm also listening to podcasts. So I was listening to one this morning with Leslie Patterson. Leslie is a world champion triathlete and she's an Oscar winner. She got the rights to On the Western Front. She spent years getting that rights and then adapting the screenplay. She ended up with an Oscar. And the interviewer said, now, I don't think that's ever done before because we're told to pick a lane, right? We're told, pick one thing and then specialize it. I understand that. I've chosen to be a Renaissance person, right? With Tung Fu, I wrote that 25 years ago. My whole career could have been about Tung Fu, worldwide enterprise. I could have done that. I don't like to do that. I agree with Leonardo da Vinci, is that I went to the Leonardo da Vinci exhibit with my son on Father's Day a couple years ago. And I'm walking around looking at his genius. And I'm thinking, what would have happened if someone had said to Leonardo, forget the flight stuff and the anatomy stuff, just stick with art, or forget the art stuff, just focus on flight, right? No, he fulfilled his genius by contributing in many different ways, not just one way. And Leslie Patterson has done the same thing. It's like she could have just been pick a lane in sports, specialize, right? But she had this vision, this dream about this screenplay, about this work of art that she wanted to get out of the world. She said something so profound today. Are you ready for what she said?
Yes.
It's a cargo net, not a ladder to the top. Now that's Leslie Patterson. It's a cargo net, not a ladder to the top. So I'm reaching out to people on the call today. I'm not recommending we're all over the map, right? That's a prescription for spinning our wheels, diffusing our efforts just by, chasing rabbits and shiny objects. I'm not recommending that. I am recommending that if we have several things that call us, that speak to us, that light us up, that instead of abandoning them and restricting ourselves from doing it because we got to pick a lane, we got to specialize, maybe life will be richer if we decide to be a Renaissance leader.
Fascinating. I think that concept, right? From my perspective, leader is only a leader if someone's willing to follow. And people are more likely to follow a leader that shows a variety of different traits for sure. But one of them is that they're genuine. And, to your point of, and I'll even say, for myself, I sometimes fall into this. I get pretty tunnel focused, and to your point of specialization and to your point there, that's not necessarily wrong, but there's times where, getting outside of that tunnel a little bit actually makes your organization better, makes you a better leader, because, to the thing we talked about earlier, I think it also gives you different perspective because sometimes it's really easy just to stay on that track, right? And just keep doubling down. Well, the track seems to keep going in the right spot, so let's just keep doing that. But in a lot of cases, again, not random, but certainly just looking around once in a while and saying, all right, am I really still on the right track?
Mary Oliver said, instructions for life: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Right? So I think both of you are an example, is that you have your podcast, you have your businesses, you're very successful entrepreneurs, and you're both involved in sports, and you're both involved in coaching your daughters, and it's like, isn't life richer because you have the best of both worlds instead of thinking it's got to be either or, and they're actually opposed to each other? In fact, do we have time for me to tell a quick little story about that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'll always remember, as you may know, I helped start and run the Maui Writers Conference for 17 years. So my sons were born and raised in Hawaii. And so I went to a National Speakers Association conference in Miami years ago. So I flew across an ocean and flew across the continent to get to that conference. Well, Maggie Bedrosian, a longtime friend from DC, we hadn't seen each other in years. And so we run into each other in the halls, and she says, Sam, how are you doing? And I start telling her, and she interrupts, and she said, Sam, tell me in one word how you're doing. Now, that's an interesting question, isn't it? So I dug deep and I said, Maggie, I'm conflicted. She said, conflicted? I said, yesterday I was on the beach with my sons, and they had their boogie boards, and they were running in and they were slapping their boards down and riding those waves all the way in till they scraped their bellies on the beach. And there wasn't anywhere in the world I wanted to be other than right there. Today, I'm surrounded by my peers, and my mind is racing with, I can do this, so I can do this, so I can do that. I said, I constantly feel like I'm being torn between two worlds. And she said, Sam, the words you use to define yourself and describe yourself are your destiny. She said, you better figure out a different word to define and describe yourself, or that's what you're going to be. Well, that was an interesting assignment, right? So I think about it. And in the middle of the night, I finally came up with it. And the next day I'm searching for Maggie in the halls. There she is. And I run up and I said, Maggie, I'm not conflicted. I'm blessed. I'm not torn between two worlds. I have the best of both worlds. And I think that's part of your message to your leaders in this podcast, is that you can have the best of both worlds if you stay focused and if you integrate them into your life. You really can have an incredibly rewarding business life and personal life as well, can't you?
Absolutely. I say so
Totally agree.
often that we can or get to choose how we feel, how we think, how we act, how we talk, our body language. And therefore, you're either choosing to be a pessimist or a realist, or, as I prefer, an optimist. You can choose to see the silver lining in anything. And I think when you do that, when you're fully able to flip that switch and become more of that person on a consistent basis, it's amazing how that changes, almost feels like it changes your circumstances, which we talk a lot about the CTFAR model, but I just think that we have the choice to say things, do things, and it's just amazing how it impacts everything else from there.
I call myself a pragmatic optimist because, as you say, the pessimist will dismiss the optimist. Oh, you've got your head in the clouds. Oh, you don't know how it really is. It's like, oh, yeah, you always look on the bright side, and they dismiss it because it feels just an emotional mindset. So I believe in being a pragmatic optimist. I absolutely believe that almost anything that can happen, there's a lesson to it, that we can put it into practice, that we can learn from it. In fact, Chris, we said we were going to share a golf story. You ready for a golf story?
I would love one.
Okay. So I mentioned I had the privilege of working on Hilton Head Island with Rod Laver. Now, of course, back then, that was it was the first destination golf resort and tennis resort that you could go to Hilton Head and stay there. They changed the whole travel industry because normally you go to a city and you go to the restaurants or the museums and so forth, but to go to an island and play golf and play tennis and ride horses and go sailing and so forth, have condos and hotels, it had not been done before Hilton Head. And of course, it was known for its golf and the Heritage Golf Classic. So, well, if we have time, I'll tell two golf stories, but let's stick with this one. So the Hale Irwin won the Heritage Golf Classic. Now I'm down in Harbor Town the next day, and you can see the driving range from where I was. There was Hale Irwin out on the driving range hitting balls. So I would not interrupt someone in flow. So I went over and watched for a while, but then he took a break. And I went over and I said, "What are you doing? You just won the Heritage yesterday." Do you know what he said? "You don't have to be sick to get better." Ha! Is that great or is that great?
That is fantastic. All right. What's the second one, Sam?
Okay, the second one is like, okay, so when I was at Palmetto Dunes, which is where Rocket had his tennis facility, the golf resort was right across. So I went over to the country club every day to have lunch. Well, Johnny Miller was our touring pro and Bob Tosky was our teaching pro. So when Johnny was on island, is that they would often be in the driving range and Bob would be giving lessons. So I watched the best every single day. Well, Barry McDermott was a reporter with Sports Illustrated. So Barry was in town for the Family Circle Cup, which was a great tennis classic event we had on the island. And so Barry asked me out to go play golf. So I had never played golf before. And yet I was playing out of my head. And after about 3 holes, Barry said, "Sam, you're pulling my leg. You have played golf before." And I said, "Barry, I promise you, I have never played before, but I have watched the best." Right? Because I wasn't out there, thinking about wrist and club speed and, knees and hip twist and so forth. I just had a mental image of those incredibly smooth strokes of Bob and Johnny, and I just mimicked them in my mind. So that's, I think, one of the purposes in life as a leader is to have a mentor, a benchmark. Who do we respect? Who is running a successful company and has a quality personal life? Who is respected by their employees? Who is scaling every year and adding value for all involved? Who has a culture where people are glad to be there? And if we watch the best and learn from the best, we expedite our own progress, don't we?
We do. I think the other takeaway there too, and obviously works very well in golf, is visualization, visualizing the outcome you want to achieve. And so often, I think when we're not too hard on ourselves about the expectations and we focus on the visualization, the outcome that we desire so often happens. And I think that's really key. And a bit of that you could call even manifestation, but I believe in all those things.
I have a specific word for that. You ready?
I'm
is
ready.
that one of the books I wrote is called Concentrate, Conzentrate. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, gave the cover endorsement, called it masterful, thought-provoking. And there's a whole section in there called concentration. And it is about how we can achieve that state of flow, that peak performance state where we're not even thinking about it. We're just doing it, whether it's in sports or whether it's studying for a test or whether it is getting involved in a hobby or listening to someone. So I agree with you that state of concentration is a skill. And if we acquire that skill, it gives us the ability to drop into deep focus anytime, anywhere, despite the distractions.
I love that. Well, I'm going to have to get a copy of this book because that's right up my alley. Last question, and I want to go back to something we were just talking about: realists and optimists, and pessimists. Obviously, I think a realist is a closet pessimist because people will often say, oh, "I just don't think it's possible." Right? Well, I'm just being a realist here. I don't want to burst your bubble, but by odds, that's just not possible. Do you agree with that?
Well, let's go back to our juxtapose. Thomas Edison said it best. He said, if you think you've exhausted all the possibilities, you haven't. And I think we ask ourselves that if we're saying this isn't possible, there's no way this is going to work, this is bound to fail, we ask ourselves this one question: is that mindset helping or is it hurting? Because if it's hurting, why do it? Why not believe in the possible and then take responsibility for setting it in motion, or asking people who have done it what their lessons learned were so that we don't have to learn them the hard way, or to get an accountability buddies to move us out of our pessimism into action. So that's how I feel about that.
Great answer. I couldn't agree more. Sam, that was awesome. A lot of fun. I certainly enjoyed our conversation today. Before we let you go, can you tell the audience where they can find you, where they can find your books, and what social media platforms you're active on?
Well, thank you. Yep. It's real easy. You can go to samhorn.com, SAMHORN.com. My 3 TEDx talks are there. My blogs are there. Yes, there are some quotes there, information about my consulting services or my speaking. And I hope people follow me on LinkedIn because, as you know, I like to write. And almost every couple of days, I'm sharing something. I riff off the world, something that I see, an insight I have, a quote that's really thought-provoking. So please follow me on LinkedIn. And I'm also on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And it'd be lovely to connect there as well.
Thank you. And that's where I found you. That's where I discovered through some other mutual friends. What a great platform. And hopefully you go out and you give Sam a listen, buy those books, check it out. For all the listeners out there, thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate your ears, the downloads, the reviews. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.